Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another fabulous Honey and Stag book launch, brought to you, of course, by the fabulous Kelly Lacey and myself, Dr. Jacky Collins, in our great desire and passion to bring you new books that are coming out and authors that we really think you should get to know and their work. So, today's book launch is all about a fabulous book that has me spellbound. And as you know, I read a lot, but this one really touched the spot on so many levels. And I hope for you, reader, viewer, I hope it takes you there. So Siren Song by Rebecca McKinney, apologies, the first in the Harrison Jones and Amy Bell mystery book series. So if you will, everybody, please welcome Rebecca McKinney to the studio.
Hi.
Hi, Rebecca. It is so wonderful to see you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for letting us do this launch for what is a truly amazing book. If you'll just allow me to introduce you a little bit more to the viewers. So Rebecca is a writer, a therapist, community development practitioner, and she was born in Boulder, Colorado, raised in Northern California, and has lived in and around Edinburgh since 1995. So I wonder if I can just ask you to start off with, Rebecca. Do you consider Scotland and Edinburgh now your home?
Yeah, absolutely. There came a point, I don't know when my brain sort of switched over and this just became home. I've been here longer than I lived in the United States, so yeah.
Yeah, and it is a beautiful country indeed to call home. So much going on, and Scotland is just a fabulous country. So yeah, so you share your home with your husband, two teenagers, three cats, and a growing collection of musical instruments. Are you the player of all those instruments?
I am the very amateurish player of a guitar and a couple of other bits and pieces. My husband and son are quite a lot more musical than I am.
Yeah. I just wonder for the next book launch if maybe we should get you and the family to do a tune for us as well.
Yeah. This is nerve-wracking enough.
Well, the great thing is just sit back and enjoy telling us about you and about this amazing book, because you created this, you've given us this pleasure, and that's what I would like to explore with you. But I think we should say first of all that this is not your first publication. There were two before. Blast Radius 2015, and then The Angel in the Stone that was shortlisted for the Highland Book Prize 2017, and both published by the fabulous Sandstone Press. So already published, but you have made a little bit of a move, shall we say, not across the aisle, it sounds too political, but into a different genre and a fusion of genre as well, that we should say. So first and foremost, I'd like to ask you, why did you decide to do the shift? What was it that led you to? Because I think there's been a number of shifts as well since 2017. So talk to us a little bit about that.
So after I published The Angel in the Stone, I immediately launched myself into another two books at once, two sort of stories that I had running in my head at the same time. And they were both quite heavy works of sort of contemporary fiction, very realist fiction, both quite political, both set in the United States. And I hit a wall, basically, with both of them. I stopped one, tried to keep going on the other, and then swapped. And I got to a point where I just felt like I didn't have the energy. I felt like I wasn't doing the stories justice. Mm-hmm. So I just stopped for a little while, and I thought, you know what, I need to take a little break. So I spent a few months not writing at all, mm-hmm. and thinking, what am I going to do? And during that time, I did something I don't do a lot of normally, which was watch a lot of TV. And I watched a lot of, I just let myself escape into some kind of fantasy fusion TV shows, mm-hmm. superhero shows, various Marvel series on Netflix, that kind of thing. And it was so nice, it was so nice just to escape down this completely other route and just let my brain switch off from these realities that I had been trying to capture in these stories. So then when I started writing again, this is what came out, and this literally spilled out in a couple of months, the first
That's it.
draft of this.
Hold that up to the screen.
Yeah.
Let's see that
So,
beautifully.
yeah.
Look at that. Look at
Yeah.
that, how glorious it is. And we'll come back later on because I want
Yeah.
to talk to you about that cover, because it's even the impact of the cover
Yeah.
before you've even opened the pages. So this is interesting. You had stories that you had to tell beforehand, and then those stories sort of came to an end, but you still felt the need to write. And I love that you didn't, because if those stories stopped, but you didn't stop.
Yeah.
I think that's a really important point. Again, for anybody who's watching, who maybe has written, has published, and it seems to have come to an end. But maybe it's a question of looking down a different avenue.
I think so. And for me, first and foremost, writing is fun, and it needs to be fun. It needs to be something that I enjoy doing, and that I want to come home from a full day doing my day job and actually give a couple hours to in the evening, or get up early at the weekend or whatever. So I want it to be fun. And so when it starts to become not fun, that's when something in my brain says, well, let's try something different. Let's not stop doing it, but let's try something different. And I've never been, I'm going to put my hand up here and say, I've never been a huge fan of straightforward crime fiction. Some of it I like, but police procedural and stuff doesn't interest me. But this fusion with a little bit of magical reality or paranormal stuff just always interested in me. And as a teenager, I read a lot of fantasy and sci-fi, so those influences are still there, I suppose.
I'm glad they are. I want to tell you, I think it works really well because it's really grounded. And I think it's grounded because of your locations and because of the action that goes on. But it's also, this other realm, this otherworldly that you take us to, but you do it, I think, just so credibly that it doesn't leave you thinking, no, it actually leaves you thinking, yes, yes, and it just takes you forward. So I want to know, in the process of this book coming into being, did you have any naysayers along the way as you put together your ideas? Or have you found that the book has come together just as the way the protagonist seems to receive those messages, shall we say? Is that how it worked for you? How did it go?
Well, I wrote it very much on my own in my loft and didn't really tell anybody what I was doing. I didn't really share it with anybody. So I just wrote it because I thought I didn't want to interrupt the process. I was really on a roll with it. So it wasn't until after I'd finished it, then I started thinking, what do I do with this? Fully aware that my publisher, Sandstone Press, probably wouldn't want it because it wouldn't fit with what they publish.
Okay. Yeah.
Which was, fair play to them. I've had a fantastic experience working with them, but I just felt like I needed to do something a little bit different. And it was only after I'd written it that I started thinking, ooh, this might not be the easiest thing to get out there, because I know that the industry doesn't quite know what to do with crossovers and genre mixing and all that. So
But I also think it's a time, just, the world is in upheaval. The industry is in upheaval. And, that sense of listening for these things, where are trends going, and why not? I mean, this was the thing that I really felt, why not?
Well, and totally. And this is where I have to say some of the influences did come from television and film as much as they came from literature, because that's where these things happen and they're hugely successful and people lap the stuff up. So, yeah. Yeah.
Definitely. It's a perfect moment before we go into deeper discussion now around the book. Would you give us a first taste of it?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a chapter at the start of the book where Harrison, my male protagonist, goes to the house of his latest client, who's the mother of a missing girl. Harrison stepped up 6 wide stone steps to the front door, placed his hand on the bell. He paused to take in the sadness of the house with its turrets and chimneys and many tall, skinny windows, those wraith-like trees at the back and the rooks that gathered in their branches. It felt like the house was sucking the oxygen from the air. He rang the bell. A dog answered with several deep, proclaiming barks. It took a minute, perhaps more, for the door to swing open. Mrs. Merriweather. Yes, hello, Dr. Jones. Elizabeth Merriweather subjected him to an unsubtle visual inspection before saying, "Come in, please." She was a striking woman in a long grey tunic and dark red pashmina. She was tall and slim, with silver blonde hair swept back into a bun, probably no older than her mid-50s. By her voice, he'd assumed her to be older. Behind her, a copper Rhodesian ridgeback stood growling. She glanced at the dog. "Simba, hush! Don't worry about him. He's a big baby. It's a pleasure to meet you." She offered her hand. As soon as Harrison touched her skin, he was hit by another volley of emotion. It was more sadness. More than sadness. It was despair and guilt. Intense, gnawing guilt that squeezed at his chest. He tried not to flinch, but she must have caught something in his eyes because she asked, "Is everything all right?" Harrison rubbed his hands on his damp coat, trying to hide his suspicion. "Yeah, fine. Let me take your coat." He slipped it off and wished he hadn't. It was barely warmer in the tiled lobby than it was outside. "Thanks." She hung it on a stand. "Well then, come with me." The dog strutted beside her, parading his balls the way a soldier parades a rifle, glancing over his shoulder at Harrison and issuing a low rumble. Like most posh people he'd met, Mrs. Merriweather was unapologetic about her inhospitable dog. "We'll sit in the study, it's the warmest. I have coffee made, if you'd like some, or tea." "Coffee's perfect, thanks. Milk and sugar. Black, please." She showed him into one of the smaller rooms that looked out on the back of the house. There was a piano, armchairs, and a green leather sofa. Bookshelves lined one of the walls, stocked mainly with leather-bound collections, the kind of books that people bought because they looked good on the shelf, not because they wanted to read them. He assessed her for a couple of seconds and changed his mind. She'd read them all. She read to escape from her life. The shelves also held photographs, small paintings and drawings in mismatched frames, vases, handmade clay birds and horses. These were the kind of mementos that would tell him what he needed to know. A fire flickered in the wood burner, putting out a welcome, radiant heat. Harrison stood in front of it for a moment, trying to dispel the chill that had settled into his bones. "It's raw today," she said. "Please, make yourself comfortable. I'll be back in just a moment. Simba, come." Harrison stayed by the fire. When she went out of the room again, he looked at the photographs on the shelves. There were pictures of 3 different dogs, one of a younger Elizabeth riding dressage on a shiny chestnut horse, and one of a pretty young girl with spectacular mane of pale blonde curls. He stared at her. She was 13 or 14, probably, on the verge of womanhood, but lying like a kid on her stomach on a daisy-speckled lawn, propped on her elbows with bare brown legs stretched behind her. This was the girl, without a doubt, the missing daughter. Harrison brushed his fingers along the silver frame. It whispered her name to him. Lucy. Lucy Merriweather. I apologize for the noise in the background, a teenager escaping.
No worries. There's life going on there, and this is good. And there's life there in that story, that missing person. Now, you spoke there of one half of the duo that you've put together, Harrison Jones. And of course, for me, that he is, a university lecturer, university professor, that for me already got me interested in this character, not a police officer, not a detective, somebody very different. And what I'd like to know, first of all, is why did you choose somebody in that profession? And then I want you to tell us what you can, without giving too much away, about this character, what he means to you and why you think we, as the reader, will take him to our hearts. The floor is yours, Rebecca.
So I studied social anthropology at Edinburgh University. I did my PhD there way back in the mid-90s. And I always felt it was, an anthropology department was such a right place for some kind of novel. It's such an interesting field, and it's full of such interesting people, and they have such different insights on the world and experiences of things that that many of us in our kind of very Western frame of reference find difficult to understand. So all the kind of psychic stuff in other cultures is really normal and is a normal part of life and not seen as out there at all. So that was kind of where some of that inspiration came from. But I also felt, as somebody who's a kind of lapsed academic myself, who I left academia because I wanted that connection with real life. I wanted to do work where I felt my work was touching people's lives and benefiting them in a very practical way rather than in a researchy academic sort of way.
Yeah.
So I think that was where Harrison came from. So there's quite a lot of me in Harrison, in that sense, I suppose. So he's a frustrated academic. He's a good teacher, but he doesn't particularly enjoy research. But he's got this kind of psychic ability, so he feels other people's emotions. It's like empathy to the nth degree. He picks up on other people's bits of other people's thoughts, and he can't switch it off, so he finds social engagement quite difficult. So he's a little bit reclusive. He struggles to have personal romantic relationships because this, if you don't have privacy from another person, it's very difficult.
And again, I mean, it was painful, but beautifully painful at the opening, where he's still living with his former girlfriend partner's food and he can't bring himself to throw that away. And again, it evoked a real tenderness towards him, along with all the things of not being able to shut the messages, the noise. And again, in the opening, you take us with him to a bar in Edinburgh, Sandy Bell's Bar, which is there near the Museum of Scotland, is it not? And I wondered, is that a favourite bar of yours?
Oh, it has been. I've had so many amazing nights in there, and it's such a part of my experience of Edinburgh. That and a few other bars, which I hope make it through this whole current situation. It would be a real loss to Edinburgh if they weren't there.
Yeah, those characters, those physical characters that I wholeheartedly agree with you, would be a shame to lose these. And I wanted to say as well about the whole thing that you do with location. You can really feel the characters move around the streets and the places in Edinburgh, and elsewhere as well, because I want to ask you about elsewhere. But there's a real sense of, this is real Edinburgh. This isn't a fantasy Edinburgh. This is real. And I really appreciated that. Now, so thank you for the introduction, to Harry, as you say, and Harry with an I. Why Harry with an I and not a Y? Why did you go with that?
Just because it's a shortening of Harrison. So, yeah.
Sweet. But the other side then of the equation is Amy Bell. Yeah. And somebody so different, and yet she becomes so important for him. Describe to us this female character. Who is she?
So when I wrote this, I had this male and female partnership, but almost a little bit of a reversal of the stereotypical gender roles. He's the sort of quite cerebral, emotional one, and she's quite tough. She's ex-army, well, TA. She's a paramedic. She's from Northern Ireland. She's from Belfast. She's had quite a tough upbringing, but she's also got this psychic ability in her sort of a capacity to glimpse the future, and she's never known what to do with it. She finds herself glimpsing events that are going to happen and then being quite powerless to stop them from happening, and that's something that she struggles with. So I wanted two characters that were really quite different, but that would learn and grow with each other, and they would have this sort of unlikely friendship.
Yeah. I again really appreciated that it wasn't typical. That you present us with a partnership that has different aspects with it. Now, I've touched on the notion of Edinburgh, but you also take us to Athens, do you not? And again, it's like, of all, it's going to sound a little bit like Play It Again, Sam, of all the places in all the world that you could have chosen as another space, you went there. Why Athens? What does Athens mean to you? Is it a special city for you, or did you just put a pin in the globe in a map?
I have been to Athens, but it was a long time ago. I was drawing on my memory of the place, but I'm also drawing, I think, on Greece's history at the present time as the kind of boundary between Europe and the Middle East, and its experience of having to absorb all of these refugees that are, leaving all these really horrific situations, in other parts of the world, and being a country that's really, really struggling with that, and really floundering and trying to, you've got people trying to take care of refugees, and then you've got people trying to not have them there in this really, really difficult situation. So it's very much a boundary place and a border place. And I wanted to try and capture that because of the storyline, because of the issue that's going on, and the crime that's going on at the heart of this book. And I also wanted to capture, I think, a little bit of the sense of the kind of flip side of what many people here perceive Greece as, this warm, wonderful holiday destination. I mean, I loved Greece. I was meant to be there last month and didn't get to go, but
Again, I appreciate very much the way that you bring out some really, really important questions for us to consider. The notion there that you talk about those border spaces and how we perceive people in different situations. I think, we need to be considering this. And then there's another quite a little hot potato that you bring up right at the beginning, when there's a discussion going on between Harrison and some colleagues. Well, the colleagues are having the discussion and they try and draw him in, but it's not easy to draw him into things for him to focus. And the whole questions around independence and nationalism, and not easy things to discuss. I just wanted, without getting into anything heavy or political, I wanted to know why it was important for you to even include that question in the book, if that's okay to ask.
Yeah, I think I'm very much of the view that books need to engage with what's going on in the world, and in the environment that they're set in. My last book, The Angel and the Stone, was absolutely set around this whole question. It was set right at the time of the referendum, and it really engaged with that. I tried not to take sides in it, and I haven't really taken sides in this one either, but it always feels important for me. And I know some people try and avoid engaging with the sort of big political picture, but to me, it always feels important to engage, or at least to kind of refer to things. I sidestepped the whole issue of Brexit because I just didn't quite know what to do with it, but yeah.
Yeah. But again, I think, you know, as you quite rightly say, this is not done in a heavy-handed way whatsoever, but it is done in a beautiful way that sets that context that this is what we're living in now. And again, in years to come, when people pick up the book and they will appreciate that, oh God, yeah, this is what was going on. These were the issues. This is what people were struggling with or debating. So thank you. Now, before I ask you to do us another reading, I wanted to ask about well, of course, you've told us about Harrison, and I love the way you say that his grandmother used to say he was sensitive in a very particular way, and that, how you introduce us to the fact that he has these abilities. But then there's another scene at the beginning where he goes back to his apartment and he has some plants growing, the Salvia divinorum plants. Yep. And immediately my interest was piqued, and I wondered as well to what extent what he then, you know, his rituals and things, did it run along the ayahuasca, I think, is it called ayahuasca practice, you know, to go into another realm. Can you tell us a bit about the plant? I mean, because why that plant?
It was until a few years ago legal, well, not illegal in Britain. So it was probably slightly easier for him to get hold of. It's also quite important in some Central American sort of indigenous practices. So I'm kind of thinking that's where he's picked it up in a way in his travels. I'm going to take the fifth as to whether I've ever experimented with any of these things, but I certainly know people, and I know anthropologists, and I know people who are into spiritual stuff who do. And there was a lecturer when I was at Edinburgh University. There was a lecturer there, emeritus professor, much older guy, who did shamanic drumming, and he was in the office next. There was a few of us postgrads in this little office, and he was in the office next to us, and he'd sit there in the afternoon and drum this rhythmic drumming, and he would put himself off into trances, and he would lead these workshops. So there was a little bit of that creeping in, you know, this kind of person who does this really eccentric thing and takes himself off into the spirit world.
I love how you claim the fifth, though. So I won't ask. And do you have any of them growing out of view of camera?
No, I don't.
No. Okay, so I wonder if at this point, could you give us the next reading, the next taste of Siren Song?
I will. So this next little segment introduces Amy, and gives you a little insight into Amy Bell's character. Revelers were out in the streets. People were shouting, laughing, singing, staggering through the winter night in their shirt sleeves and short dresses. Behind the clouds, there was a full moon, and for some reason that always made everything wilder. Amy let herself spare a single thought for her colleagues who had drawn the short straw tonight. Where to? Shona asked. She was the youngest and freshest of them all. I'm not ready for home yet. Girls, I'm done. I think I'll jump in a taxi, Amy said. Oh, no way, we're just getting started. Don't let me stop you, I'm knackered. Amy rummaged in her handbag for her purse while the others discussed options for continuing their night. She pulled out a £20 note and tucked it into the pocket of her jeans, stowed her purse and looked for a taxi. Hackneys rumbled up and down the street, but not a single one had a yellow light showing. She might have to walk some way before she found one. Thanks for asking me, it's been fun. You coming to the Christmas night out? Lynn asked. Amy had been avoiding any and all mention of Christmas and festive nights out. Not sure yet. I'll see you next week. She headed off in the direction of home, striding as powerfully as she could in the hateful shoes. She got as far as Leith Walk, but still couldn't find a taxi. The straps of her sandals cut across the top of each foot, sending searing pain up her legs. But she was halfway home, and there didn't seem much point in spending money on a fare now. It was only when she turned into a quieter side street and left the city centre crowds behind that she realised she was being followed. Footsteps came from rubber-soled shoes and were very slightly syncopated. He walked with a limp. He also breathed heavily and coughed softly every 30 seconds or so. Amy didn't have to turn around to know it was Ricky. She forced herself to keep walking without changing her pace. She wouldn't be able to outrun him in these shoes, even with his bad legs, so she needed to get near enough to home before she confronted him. Because she had to confront him. This could not be allowed to happen again. He followed her all the way to Easter Road, falling back a little as she turned right onto Albion Road. She ducked into the shadow of a recessed doorway and waited for him to round the corner. When he did, she stepped straight into his path, grabbed him by the collar of his jacket, and kneed him as hard as she could in the groin. He grunted and doubled over, cursing and struggling for breath. "You bitch," he blurted. Amy kicked his injured leg with a spiky heel, and he crumpled like a play-acting footballer, clutching his knee. She gave him a shove, placed her foot on his gut, and leaned over him and spoke softly. "You stay the fuck away from me, Ricky. If I see you in my street again, I'll see to it you can't walk away." A final kick for emphasis. "All right, darling," asked a passing trunk. You needing my help?" "No, I don't need your help, thank you." Amy left Ricky lying there and jogged home, slammed the stair door behind her and ran up the stairs. She pulled off the heels and examined the raw patches and blisters. She rubbed on some Savlon, thinking as she did so that the original designer of stiletto heels must have been a sexual predator.
Thank you. Thank you for that insight into Amy. I think many of us will have felt that similar pain of that kind of footwear, even me at certain points in life. And again, that idea of this is not a character to be messed with.
No.
Now, before we go any further, I just want to remind viewers, please, 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 if you have questions for Rebecca and also for our second author that is coming on, if you have questions for them, please do place them there in the chat, and the authors will respond to you as we go. So, Rebecca, I want to thank you for the conversation that we've had so far. I'm going to be back with you a little bit later, but it gives me immense pleasure to put two authors together now. I'd like to introduce Leslie Kelly, the author of the Health of Strangers novels, a fabulous crime series set in a parallel Edinburgh, or maybe not so parallel anymore, beset by a killer virus. And so please, viewers, if you would welcome into the room Leslie Kelly, and I'll be back later. Thanks, Rebecca. Bye for now.
Thanks, Jacky.
Hello.
Oh.
Well, it's always a delight to talk to another author about their work, but I have to say this is particularly good to be talking to Rebecca about the fabulous Siren Song, because Rebecca and I, as some of the people who are watching probably know already, have worked together for a number of years and laterally sharing the same office up until COVID did for that kind of thing. And the great thing about sharing an office with another writer is that you get to talk a lot about your work in progress to somebody who cares far more than your family does about how the writing's going. So I remember you talking about this book in its very early stages, and it certainly seemed to me that this was a book that felt as if you were having a really enjoyable time writing it. You seemed to really be enjoying it. And I just wondered what it was about this book in particular that made it so pleasurable for you.
I think because I had released myself a little bit from this need to get it right, because it's a little bit more fantastical, as it were. I thought, I can allow myself to go into the realm of imagination a bit more than I have with previous books. And so it felt pretty liberating, I would have to say. Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, it reads like a book that was very pleasurable to write. And that really comes across. It just flies off the page. But your previous books, obviously, they had a kind of Scottish setting to them. And I have to say that this book is not overly pleasant about some Edinburgh people, a sort of certain sector of Edinburgh society. And of course, officially I should be offended by that as a native of the city, but I think you probably got it quite right on what happens behind these doors of the new town and the evil doings that go on. And as Jacky said, you moved to Greece partway through this. But obviously, you're from America, and I just wondered, had you ever considered writing a book with part of the action set in your hometown or somewhere in America? Or?
So the two books I was speaking to Jacky about at the start, the two unfinished works in progress, are both set in America. And they're both pretty heavy duty, and I just felt that I wasn't quite ready to do them,
Not even the challenge of Trump, that wouldn't tempt you back?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. I'm not sure where to go with that. Other than
you got to let that
away.
play out. And
yeah.
You could do a historical novel about,
Oh, I will. I think the time for me to write an American novel is coming. Definitely.
And will it be an American crime novel or?
Oh, I don't know. I think I'd quite like to get another one or two out of Harrison and Amy, and then see where it goes from there.
Oh, well, Harrison and Amy do get around. It's not beyond the possibility that, they could be, their senses could be telling them that it's time to go to California. Or
well, you never know. There is a subplot that's going to be running through the books that might potentially take them there. So.
Oh, that's very intriguing. Yeah, so obviously your first two books were literary fiction, and my books have, to this point, all been crime novels. And I can only think that you've decided to come over to my side of the fence because you've identified quite correctly that crime writers have more fun. Is that the case?
Maybe it is. Yeah. I think it was maybe the first time I went to noir at the bar, and I thought, this is fantastic. I'm missing all this action.
Yeah, I mean, there's a very definite kind of group of Scottish crime writers in the way that there isn't, I think, of literary fiction.
I think although the crime, it's an interesting thing for me because, you're writing about murder, you're writing about these horrific things that happen to people, but there's this, within the actual writing scene, there's a humor and a lightness. I
think it is one of the interesting things about Scottish crime writing is that it is so dark and yet often so funny at the same time. And there was certainly some humour shining through in your book, and saw that in the readings that we made about the Scottish drunk helping out in the not untypical, but I mean, one of the things that I'm really interested in is how you found it in terms of marketing this book. What was different about marketing a crime novel from marketing a literary fiction?
I'm still working that out. And I think, I don't know, I'm still a little bit unsure as to the appeal for people who like more traditional crime, which doesn't have this kind of psychic element, whether they will embrace this or not. I've yet to find that out, and yet to see what reviews say and that kind of thing. It's been fun to work on marketing. I've felt a lot more confident with it, I suppose. Maybe it's just experience of having done a couple of books in the past. But my hope is that it maybe appeals to a slightly wider audience. If the literary fiction potentially sounds really daunting. I mean, I think my first two books are really easy to read, and everybody that's read them has said, oh, I didn't expect it to just be such a page turner. But yeah, this might have a slightly wider appeal to people who wouldn't necessarily pick up a literary fiction.
Yeah, and certainly online, there's plenty of organisation around crime fiction, different readers groups and things. But I suppose difficult to compare your experiences really with COVID, making it such a particularly difficult time to market anything, really. But
but also, I mean, thanks to people like Kelly and Jacky, there's this whole online world out there that I barely know how to tap into, but we're so fortunate and blessed to have allies in this industry, you know, who do all of this for
Absolutely.
us. So yeah.
Yeah, we couldn't do all this without the likes of Kelly
Yeah.
and Jacky actually,
Yeah.
you know, making these platforms available. But your book, I mean, obviously it has this very special kind of otherworldly element to it, and it reminded me a bit of the book The Time Traveller's Wife. I don't know if that's one that you've read. And for me, in The Time Traveller's Wife, they had a real look at the practicalities of time travel. You know, it wasn't just, oh, we can travel through time. It was kind of what that actually does to your body, what that does to your relationships and things. And I think you had a real look at the kind of practicalities of being an empath. And I think you touched on this with your discussions with Jacky, but, you know, how you have a relationship with somebody. And there's a bit of a will they, won't they relationship between the two main characters. But can an empath have a relationship with somebody, do you think? Or
I think that's a very good question. I mean, I certainly have moments in my own relationship where I'm really glad we can't read each other's minds. You know,
most of the time you can guess what they're thinking, really, can't you?
Yeah.
Scottish men, not complicated.
But I think a successful relationship relies on holding back sometimes, just as it relies on the ability to be able to talk and be honest with each other. You have to have those private spaces and those moments to just say nothing. So how you could live with somebody and have a relationship with somebody when you've got this kind of open door into their head, I don't know. So that's one of the kind of things that pursues Harrison certainly throughout the book, is whether he can or can't have a relationship with anyone really, or whether he just wants to keep everybody at kind of arm's length.
Yeah, having to exist in sort of total honesty all the time would just be the kiss of death to most relationships. And kind of, you'd never want to go in with a new haircut and ask how you look, would you?
When you say, do I look fat in this? You get the real
My
answer.
bum look big.
Yeah.
So again, you're a musician as well as a writer, and music has been a bit of a recurring theme in your books. So why is it you're drawn to writing about musicians?
I think it's maybe because of musicians. Oh, it's a good question. I'm trying to articulate this. I think musicians put themselves into quite vulnerable situations when you stand up in front of an audience and you sing. And certainly that's the case with Lucy, the singer in this book. You bare your soul and people want to know you. You know, I wouldn't be talking about myself here because I don't really consider myself to be that much of a musician, but other people, you know, audience members, people listening, think that they know the musician because they're giving away such intimacy in that performance. And I think it fitted a character like Lucy very well in that she kind of reveals all when she sings. And so that kind of leads her into some of these situations that she's found herself in.
So you see a kind of parallel there between being an empath and being able to sense things, and a musician and being able to sense. Yes, most things kind of operate outside the slightly conscious world. You know, you tap into something.
It taps into something very deep and very emotional, spiritual, I would say, if you believe in that kind of thing. So, yeah.
And as I said, you're a musician, so kind of see where this recurring theme comes from. Another recurring theme that I'm not quite so sure where it's coming from with you is that veterans have quite often featured in your work, people who've had very, very bad times, either in war zones or conflict zones. And I just wondered where the urge to write about that particular group came from.
I don't know where that comes from. It's just something that's been an interest for me. I think because it's maybe growing up in the United States and growing up in the kind of post-Vietnam generation where a lot of my friends' dads had been to war, and then people of my own generation going off into the armed forces, and I suppose also having read a lot of history and a lot of experience about trauma and PTSD. I think for the work I do around counseling, I've read quite a lot about that as well. So it's just something I think that affects our society. There are a lot of people who go off to serve in the forces and come back and try and settle back into their lives, and they bring these things back with them, and it is there, and it's part of our experience as a country. So yeah, it just seems to bubble up in my writing.
Yeah, I mean, certainly as a literary character, it gives real backstory, doesn't it, and
Yeah,
depth, and
yeah.
you can see how it affects their everyday life and their relationships and things.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and certainly, and you've admitted in previous books that at least one of your characters was slightly based on a mutual colleague of ours. Not sure if he knows that or not, or it might come as a revelation if he's watching this. But
He was a nice character, though.
it was a very nice character based on a very nice person.
Yeah.
But I just wondered, is there any real life influences on any of these characters in here?
Certainly, yeah, certainly. Although I'm not going to reveal where or who. The anthropology department that Harrison works in is based very much on my memory of the department at Edinburgh University when I was there. But that was in the mid-90s. I think it's in a different building now. I think, the people are all largely different. There's nobody, and I would have to say this quite adamantly, there's nobody in that department in the book who is based on anyone who I knew in the real life department, in case anybody asks any questions. So, yeah.
I'm sure your ex-colleagues will be giving a fine going over to identify whether, and as with always these things, people decide that they are a particular character, whether they're anything like them or not.
Yeah, no, I don't tend to. I mean, I try deliberately not to shape any character too strongly on a real person, because it's unfair to that real person, in my opinion, if they're still alive. So, and Kelly is saying time, I've just noticed.
Is, and I never even got to ask you the question about how dare you kill a dog in your book
a dog.
as a crazy cat lady, but I think we'll leave that one for the comments on Facebook, where people will make their feelings known about that, because you can kill anything in a crime book apart from an animal. But thank you very much for answering my questions, Rebecca.
Thank you for being here. It's been a joy.
Yes, you wicked woman, Rebecca. I'm loving that discussion. And yeah, please, viewers, ask about this killing of the dog. It really is not good. And Leslie Kelly, thank you so much for some fabulous questions there, teasing out more from Rebecca. It's really good. Rebecca, I wonder, would you do us the honours of holding up that beautiful book there?
Yeah.
Again.
So, can you see that?
Yeah.
That's a proof copy, so it still has the little banner across the top.
Yeah. Okay, I want you to, you don't have to do some sort of like mega critical analysis, but I want you to tell us the whole, coming together of that book jacket, how you arranged that, what was the process, and what's your thoughts on how it's looking? I know you must like it, but what is it that you like about it? So take us through that.
Yeah, so I worked with Amanda Horan, who was connected to me through Kelly, and she was great. So really she was brilliant, because she said to me, she gave me a little questionnaire which had a number of questions for me about what kind of feel I wanted from the cover, what kind of emotion I wanted it to put forward, what kind of imagery I wanted. I wanted to avoid the sort of fairly stereotypical crime cover with the man in a trench coat walking along an alleyway kind of thing. But I actually wasn't really sure what I wanted, but she did the magic, and she managed to kind of pull together some ideas. I wanted the sense of the dark, the brooding. I don't know if you can see the buildings there. It is Edinburgh.
Is this Leith? Is this down at Leith?
Yes. So it's Edinburgh, but it's not Edinburgh Castle. It's not the skyline that a lot of people would recognize. But it's the port.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, the port of Leith has always been Edinburgh's connection with the rest of the world. It's where the whaling ships come in. It's where, you know, all the big deep sea dive vessels are still based there. It's Edinburgh connected via the sea with everywhere, you know. And to me, that's what the sea represents. It's not a divider, it's a connector. You know, so then you've got this very storm-tossed water with the little boat, which is a, you know, reference to an event in the book. And then what was great for me was that Amanda gave me some power. So she told me where to go and look for images. And she said, how about you pick some images that you like? So she gave me that control, which was brilliant. So I was able to find the kind of person to represent Harrison and, you know, say this guy kind of looks like how I imagine him. Yeah,
it's great. I loved, you know, what you're speaking about here about the idea of a collaboration. You know, you've got that, you know, that very, and there's no doubt about it that Amanda is, you know, her creative power is brilliant. But as the author, with, you know, with what you see and how you see, and bringing that together, I think it's great. I think the for me really evoked that sense of so much that is churning. You know, the darkness that is there. And then I wanted to ask you about the title, and again, because, you know, we don't like to give away too many spoilers, but you could have called, you know, you could have given this book a number of titles, but you went with Siren Song.
I went with Siren Song because, as most people, well, some people would know, the sirens of ancient Greece were these mythical creatures that would sing, and they would sing this song that was so seductive and alluring that it would lure sailors onto the rocks, and they would shipwreck. So, you know, Odysseus and his men in the Odyssey were lured onto the rocks, or had to cover their ears to make it past them. So it's a kind of reference to the missing girl who's a beautiful singer, and she comes into difficulties because of the beauty of her voice, and people want her so badly because she's got this beautiful voice. And, you know, and then of course she goes to Greece, and so there's this you know, this double meaning there, I suppose. So that was where the Siren Song came from. No reference to police cars in there at all.
no police procedural here.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong in that. Just doing something different, and that is what's beautiful. Now, because at this moment in time, you know, we are still struggling with this virus in one way or another, and I wanted to ask, of your two characters, the main characters, because there's a range of people in here, but between Harrison and Amy, who do you think would have fared better over these past 4 months, 5 months, and why?
I think potentially Amy.
Okay,
I think
why?
Possibly Harrison would have just gone into meltdown by this point. It might have just all got a bit too much for him. I think Amy has this toughness about her, and a kind of business-like. She can be really struggling with things, but she just gets on with it. She has a moment at the start of the book where she considers not getting on with it and just leaving everything behind. And that's actually how they come to meet each other. But I won't spoil that too much for people. But I think she might be looking into the future and seeing an end to this, or she might not. She might be trying to avoid all that. But I think she has an ability just to get her head down and carry on. And
do you think her years of service, you know, do you think they would have equipped her for the better coping? You know, despite having gone through some difficult things, or maybe because of that experience, you know, in service, that life under COVID, she'd have coped better.
There's that, and she's a paramedic, so she's kind of seen it all. You know, she's kind of been there and been around the block a few times and seen it all. So for a relatively young woman, she's pretty tough.
Yeah. So here we are, celebrating what I hope, because it's down there being advertised as, book one, and being advertised as book one always suggests that there's some to follow, at least a book two. I perceive that there's definite mileage in this partnership. Do you feel that as well?
I feel that, absolutely. I'm not ready to say goodbye to them yet. So there is a book two in progress.
Yes.
Not as quickly as I might like, just because we're juggling so many things, but book two will come and we'll see where it goes.
That is so good, because I think, when you get to the end of a book, and sometimes you can tell when a book is a standalone, and it was what it was, and it was beautiful for what it was. Then you get a book that says to you, and that's why I wonder, referring back to what you said at the beginning, that idea of all the things that you've been watching, because this is so visual, in a sense of, I want to know what happens to these people. This can't stop now. It has to be next week's installment,
might be next year's installment by this point.
There wasn't meant to be pressure there, of course. But I'm really pleased that you say that. And then my last question really is to say to you, having moved into this fusion, but we'll call it crime fiction with a twist, which is beautiful. Do you see yourself staying in this? Do you feel, I know it's only one book in, but do you feel that as a writer, you have found a home for your creativity?
I don't know. I think what I know about myself as a person is that I get bored relatively easily. I don't like things to be the same all the time. I'm not a very habitual person. So every so often I get this urge to, throw everything up into the air and see what sort of shape it all comes down in. So I can envision myself writing another 2 or 3 of these maybe, and seeing where it goes. And then I think I'll just have to see what I feel at the time. Because I have lots of ideas. So every time I'm working on a book, I've always got 2 or 3 other things bubbling away at the back of my mind. And it's a very organic sort of process for me. I'm not good at planning my writing, which is probably why it takes me a bit longer to do it. I'm very much a by the seat of my pants kind of writer. So I have to feel it, and I have to just go with whatever comes out at the time.
I love what you say about not being tied down though by patterns, by habit, that you need to let inspiration, creativity just wander and find its expression. That is exciting. So from all of us at Honey and Stag, we wish you all the very best with Siren Song. For people watching, where do we get hold of this book? How do we get it? What's the plan?
So it will be available on Amazon on Thursday, this coming Thursday. Well, in fact, today, even. As by the time we go live, it is now available in paperback and ebook. So have a look for it. I'll post links. And I really can't wait. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here and celebrating this launch with me, and I'm really looking forward to chatting with everybody about it.
Totally. Again, people do send your questions in, and Rebecca posting the links there, to be able to get hold of your copy of Siren Song, which I heartily recommend to you. Just remains for me again to thank you, Rebecca, for letting us interview you today about that. Honey and Stag, thank you massively for tuning in and being here with us. Please do follow us on our Facebook page, also on Instagram and Twitter, where you can catch all the things that we're involved in. Because if it's literary and if it's worth being into, we'll be getting into it and bringing it to you as well. Thank you so much for being with us, and we'll see you again at our next event. Goodbye for now.